Deep in the wetlands of Louisiana, where the bayous twist slowly through cypress trees and dark water reflects the moon like broken glass. There are small wooden structures most people never notice. They sit low near the water, half sunk into mud, surrounded by hanging moss and thick fog. These are bayou net sheds. During the day, they look harmless. Weathered boards, old fishing nets, rusting hooks and floats left behind by fishermen long gone. But when night falls, the bayou changes. Water ripples without movement. Nets sway though there is no wind. And from inside these sheds come sounds that do not belong to animals. Locals say these sheds were built where people vanished, where bodies were hidden, where something was trapped between land and water. Tonight, we drift deep into the Louisiana bayou, to the most haunted bayou net sheds. Places where the swamp listens, and where something still waits in the dark water below. Hello, my dear friend. I am truly glad you are here with me tonight. I hope you are somewhere dry and safe, far from the humid air and black water we are about to explore. Louisiana's bayous are ancient. Slow-moving waterways surrounded by thick swamp, dense trees, and endless shadows. For generations, fishermen built small net sheds along the bayou. They stored traps, nets, boats, and supplies there. Many lived alone for weeks at a time. The bayou is unforgiving. Boats capsized. People drowned. Arguments ended in silence and shallow graves beneath the water. Some net sheds were abandoned suddenly. Some were left behind after tragic accidents. And some were said to be cursed from the moment they were built. Today, visitors report hearing whispers inside empty sheds, seeing figures standing ankle-deep in water beneath them, and feeling watched from every direction, even from below the surface. Before we drift any deeper, let me ask you something. If you were alone in the bayou at night and saw a light glowing inside an abandoned net shed, would you paddle closer to investigate or turn around and leave immediately? Now breathe slowly. Listen to the insects. And let us begin our journey through the haunted bayou net sheds of Louisiana. On the edge of a vast, silent salt marsh stands the black cypress net shed. It is a low, weathered structure built from pitch-stained timber, huddled beneath a canopy of enormous, moss-draped cypress trees. Their roots twist into the dark water, and their branches knit together overhead, casting the shed in perpetual twilight even at noon. The air is thick with the scent of brine and decay. The shed itself was once a workspace for mending the vast fishing nets that once harvested the marsh. Its walls hung with rusted hooks and coiled, rotten lines. As night falls over the marsh, the shed becomes a theater of shadows. Without any apparent light source, dark shapes begin to move across its interior walls. They are not the formless shifts of moonlight, but defined silhouettes. They resemble the outlines of men, hunched and busy, their arms moving in rhythmic, stretching motions, as if handling and repairing invisible nets. These shadows are silent, their pantomime conducted in utter stillness, yet they convey a deep sense of focused, weary labor. But the true phenomenon is auditory. Visitors who dare to step inside the cold, single-room report hearing footsteps. They are slow, deliberate, and heavy, with a distinct, wet quality. They are not on the creaky floorboards of the shed itself, but clearly beneath them, splashing through shallow water or thick mud. The steps pace from one end of the subfloor space to the other, a patient, sodden patrol. Sometimes they pause directly below where the visitor stands, creating an unbearable tension. There is never a source, no visible figure when one looks out the door or through the gaps in the floor. The sounds are simply there, a chilling reminder that the shed is not built on solid ground. but perched on pilings above the hungry, black water of the marsh. The history of the shed is one of isolation and relentless work. For generations, it was maintained by a solitary net mender. Often an older fisherman no longer able to handle the boats. The last was a man named Silas, who lived in a shack nearby. His entire world was the rhythm of the tides and the repair of tiers in the great nets, work he performed by lantern light long into the night. The marsh is treacherous, with hidden channels and sucking mud. One evening, after a storm, Silas was checking the pilings beneath the shed. The wood, weakened by rot and teredo worms, gave way. He fell into the icy water and the deep mud. His culls swallowed by the vastness of the marsh. His body was found days later. But his routine, it seems, was not so easily dissolved. The moving shadows defy easy explanation. There are no nearby roads for car lights. And the dense cypress canopy blocks most moonlight. Investigators using infrared cameras see no heat signatures that could cast such shadows. The footsteps are equally perplexing. Recordings capture the distinct splash and suction. But audio analysis suggests the sounds are not coming from a single point, but seem to emanate from the entire foundation. As if the shed itself is remembering a vibration. The water beneath the floor is indeed deep and muddy. But no animal native to the area creates such a slow, bipedal, and persistent pattern of movement. To enter the black cypress net shed is to step into a pocket of preserved time. The shadows on the wall perform their endless, silent mending. Below, the slow, wet footsteps trace the boundaries of a space that is no longer safe. The experience is not one of violent haunting, but of profound immersion in a lonely vocation. You are not witnessing a ghost, but the echo of a life defined by routine. By the feel of wet twine, and by the constant, whispering presence of the marsh below. It feels as though the shed has absorbed the very motions of labor. And the rhythm of its keeper's final, fatal steps. The phenomena are not trying to communicate, they are simply continuing. The shadows mend, the steps patrol. Together, they create a perfect, looping memory of a man who lived between the water and the work. A memory so strong it plays out nightly in silhouette and sound. A permanent fixture in the dark space beneath the cypress trees. Where the air is always damp and the past is still ankle-deep in black water. At the end of a weathered dock, on a lake known for its sudden, swallowing fogs, stands a small, tar-paper shed. It is known as the Widowa's Hook Shed. No one fishes from this dock anymore. The lake here is too deep, too still, and the stories are too old. The shed itself is locked, its window boarded, but through the gaps in the warped wood, a peculiar sight is visible. They are displayed, each on its own bit of twine, a forest of inverted, gleaming points. They are of all sizes, from small trout hooks to large, wicked-looking trebles meant for pike. They are old, their steel darkened, yet their points seem unnaturally sharp in the dim light. By day, the shed is silent. The hooks are motionless. But after midnight, particularly on nights when the lake is calm, and the fog creeps onto the shore. But after midnight, particularly on nights when the lake is calm and the fog creeps onto the shore, a change occurs inside that locked space. The hooks begin to sway. Not wildly, but with a gentle, pendulous motion, as if disturbed by a subtle, rhythmic current of air that does not exist. They move out of sync, each at its own slow pace, creating a silent, metallic dance. Those who have pressed an eye to a crack in the boards describe a feeling of underwater observation. As if watching seaweed drift in a deep, dark tide. It is the final detail, however, that elevates the phenomenon from eerie to deeply unsettling. Several witnesses, those who have braved the shed at the witching hour, report seeing moisture gather on the points of the swaying hooks. Not condensation, but distinct, heavy droplets that swell at the tips before falling. In the faint moonlight filtering through the boards, these droplets appear dark. Some have described them as looking like fresh blood, a slow, rhythmic drip from each swaying point, leaving no mark or pool on the dusty floor below. The history of the shed is bound to the lake and a woman named Maeve. Decades ago, her husband, Arlen, was a commercial fisherman on these waters. This shed was his workshop, where he would prepare his gear. The hooks hanging from the ceiling were his system, a way to store them safely and to dry them after use. Arlen was known for his meticulous care of his equipment. One autumn night, a storm blew in faster than forecast. Arlena's boat was found adrift the next morning, empty. His body was never recovered. Maeve, now a widow, kept the shed exactly as he left it. She became a reclusive figure, often seen sitting on the dock at night, staring at the water. Locals say she began to believe the lake had not taken her husband, but was keeping him, and that the hooks, his prized tools, were a kind of connection. When Maeve herself passed away years later, the shed was locked, and the hooks were left hanging, a memorial in steel. This story of loss and unresolved grief is central to the phenomenon. Their swaying after midnight could be a replay of the subtle motion from when he would select them, or perhaps the echo of the lake's currents he knew so well. The dripping is more complex. It could be a trick of light and genuine condensation, interpreted by a primed and fearful mind. But the consistency of the report suggests a perceptual phenomenon rooted in the story's emotion. Maeve's grief, and the community's understanding of the lake's taking, may have imbued the place with a narrative of loss so potent it manifests physically. The dark droplets are not literal blood, but a symbolic expression of the injury. The wound of the widow's loss, perpetually renewed on the very instruments of her husband's vocation. To stand outside the widow's hook shed after midnight is to witness a private, sorrowful ritual. The swaying hooks mimic the motion of the water that claimed a man. The dripping points commemorate the endless, quiet bleeding of a heartbroken vigil. It is a place where grief has been translated into a silent, metallic language. The lesson here is about the objects we leave behind. They can become repositories for stories more powerful than their function. The hooks were meant to catch fish. Now, they catch the twilight, swaying to a memory of the lake. Weeping dark tears for a man who never came home. And the woman who waited in vain, forever marking the passage of time with a slow, silent drip in a locked and lonely shed. In the vast, trackless expanse of the Blackwater swamp, there is a single, stubborn artifact of human endeavor. It is known as the Whisper Reed Shed. A small, wooden structure built on a rare hummock of dry ground, it was once used by trappers and surveyors. It has not been occupied for generations, but it is not abandoned. It is encircled, completely and densely, by a towering wall of reeds. No path leads through them. They simply part for no one. By day, the shed sits in silence, save for the buzz of insects and the distant call of waterfowl. But as night falls and the swamp transforms into a world of shifting shadows and strange sounds, the reeds begin to whisper. They are not loud, but startlingly clear, as if someone is speaking just behind the wall of green. They are human voices, or a perfect imitation of them. They speak in calm, conversational tones. They say names. Sometimes it is the listener's own name. Sometimes it is a name from their past, a friend or relative long forgotten. The voices are familiar, yet impossible to place. They never threaten, never cajole. They simply state a name, and then, they offer a direction. Turn left here. Follow the water. Just a little further. The path is clear. The instructions are always specific, always urging movement away from the shed, deeper into the heart of the swamp. But anyone familiar with the swamp knows they lead only into the most treacherous, bottomless areas, into the domain of gators and sinkholes and water that does not reflect the sky. A linguist named Ilara came to study the phenomenon after hearing accounts from a rescued hunter. She was a skeptic, attributing the whispers to auditory pareidolia, the mind creating patterns from random noise. She set up recording equipment inside the shed and waited for nightfall. The whispers began as promised. Her name, spoken in a tone she associated with a favorite teacher from childhood, drifted through the walls. Then a direction, a suggestion to follow the southern channel. Her instruments captured the sounds, but spectral analysis showed no abnormal frequencies, just human-like vocal patterns emerging from the recorded rustle of the reeds. It was as if the reeds themselves had learned to speak. Driven by a need for direct observation, she stepped outside with a powerful flashlight. The beam cut through the dark, illuminating the dense, vertical forest of reeds. As she shone the light along the wall, the whispering stopped abruptly. In the silence, she heard a different sound, a soft, wet sliding, as if the reeds were shifting against one another, repositioning themselves. When she turned the light off, the whispers returned, closer now, more insistent, offering new, easier directions to a place she knew did not exist. A deep, primal warning flared in her mind. This was not communication. It was lure. The shed was not a sanctuary, but a trap. The reeds were not a wall, but a net. She retreated inside, understanding that to listen was to be caught. Her research in the nearby fishing village uncovered an old, almost forgotten practice. The original people of the swamp, it was said, could read the reeds. The way they bent, the sound they made in the wind, it was a language that described water depth, firmness of ground, and safe passage. That knowledge was lost. The whispers, an elder suggested, might be the reeds still speaking that language, but with no one left to translate it correctly. The names they use are plucked from the minds of listeners, a hook of familiarity. The directions are not malicious, but simply the truth of the swamp as the reeds understand it, a map to the deepest waters, the oldest channels, the heart of their world. Ilara left the swamp with hours of recordings she has never played publicly. She now believes the whisper reed shed sits at a junction. The reeds are not evil, but they are deeply, fundamentally alien. They perceive the swamp as a home, and they speak its pathways. To a human, their truth is a death sentence. The shed's purpose is now clear. It is a test. It offers shelter, and then it offers a guide. To trust the whisper is to accept an invitation into a world that does not accommodate human survival. The trappers who built the shed are gone. But their rule remains, passed down as a warning. You can use the shed for shelter. But you must never, ever listen to the reeds after dark. Close the door. Block your ears. Wait for dawn. For the whispers are always there, speaking a beautiful, deadly map. Calling you home to a place you were never meant to be. On the edge of Lake Meridian, where the reeds grow thick and the water turns from clear to a deep, tea-stained brown. There stands a relic from a different time. It is known to locals as the Sunken Net Shack. A simple, tar paper shed built on wooden pilings decades ago by a fisherman long since gone. Time and rising waters have claimed it. Half submerged in water, this shed leans badly, a skeletal silhouette against the sunset, its roof sagging like a tired shoulder. By day, it is a sad, quiet thing. The lake laps gently against its submerged lower walls. Minnows dart through the slats of what was once a small dock. It seems merely forgotten, a piece of clutter the lake hasn't fully absorbed. But as dusk settles and the last of the birds fall silent, a change comes over the place. The water around the shack grows preternaturally still, a perfect pane of black glass. And then, the bubbles begin. They are not the small, sporadic bubbles of fish or decaying plant matter. They are large, deliberate globes of air that rise in clusters from the murky depths directly beneath the shack's sunken floor. They break the surface with soft, gulping sounds, spreading concentric rings across the still water. It is a regular occurrence, a nightly ritual witnessed by anyone brave or curious enough to paddle out after dark. The bubbles rise, and then the sounds begin. Muffled knocking sounds echo from below the surface. They are not random. They carry a pattern, a slow, rhythmic 1-2-3 pause, then 1-2. They sound like someone tapping on wood from inside a submerged room. To stand in a small boat on that black water, listening to those knocks emanating from the deep, is to feel a profound and unsettling sense of intrusion. You are floating above a locked door, and something on the other side is signaling its presence. A biology student named Sam, conducting a survey of the Lockia's edge flora, decided to investigate. He anchored his canoe a careful distance away, a digital recorder in hand. For an hour, he listened. The bubbles began at exactly 10:15. The knocking followed 2 minutes later. He described the sound not as frantic, but purposeful, like a code, or like someone methodically testing the integrity of a wall. He lowered a hydrophone into the water. The recorded knocks were clearer, more distinct, and beneath them, his equipment picked up another sound, a low, faint hum, like the vibration of a submerged cable. Theories about the shack are as deep and murky as the water that holds it. The official record states the original fisherman, a man named Eli, simply moved away. But older residents tell a different story. They say Eli was secretive, a tinkerer who was always modifying his workshop below the main floor. They whisper that he wasn't just fishing. He was listening. He believed the deepest part of the lake, a cold, silted trench near his pilings, was a place where sound traveled strangely, where you could hear things from far away, or from deep below. Geologists suggest a mundane explanation. Methane gas from decaying organic matter on the lakebed could explain the bubbles. The knocking could be old, waterlogged timbers contracting in the cool night air, creating pops and creaks that travel through the water. Yet the regularity defies this. The pattern feels intentional. The sounds are always wood on wood, never the crack of ice or the groan of metal. The more speculative explanation ties into Eliot's obsession. Some believe his modifications, his listening devices, somehow tapped into an acoustic anomaly. The shack, now sunken, acts as a giant resonator. The knocks are not coming from inside it, but are being focused and amplified by its hollow, waterlogged structure. They are echoes of distant industry, of shifting tectonic plates, or perhaps, as Eli might have hoped, something else entirely. A signal from the deep trench, repeating its pattern into the void, waiting for a reply no one knows how to give. Today, the sunken net shack is left alone. Fishermen give it a wide berth. Teenagers dare each other to touch its rotting siding, but rarely follow through. It remains a question mark on the still water. The bubbles rise. The knocks sound. And the lake keeps its secret. It serves as a quiet monument to human curiosity. A reminder that some structures are not just built on the land, but into the fabric of a place. And sometimes, the place continues to use them long after the builder is gone. Tapping on the walls of our world from the other side. On a remote stretch of the northern coastline stands a simple, salt-bleached shed known to locals as the Lantern Drift Shed. Perched on a rocky outcrop above a pebbled beach, it was once used by salvage crews to store gear and to shelter while waiting for debris from shipwrecks to wash ashore. But on its weathered frame, a single artifact remains, a heavy, barnacle-encrusted oil lantern, its glass panes clouded and cracked, still hanging from a rusted hook by the door. The phenomenon begins with the lantern itself. Each evening, shortly after the sun dips below the horizon and the world is bathed in deep blue twilight, the lantern lights. There is no flame, no flicker of match or lighter. The interior of the glass simply glows with a soft, steady, sulfur-yellow light. It is not the bright beam of a signal, but the gentle, ambient radiance of an old wick lamp, casting a warm pool of illumination on the rocky ground beneath it. The light lasts for precisely 10 minutes before fading completely, as if an unseen hand has turned down the wick until it gutters out. It is during this brief period of illumination that the second phenomenon occurs. Figures appear within the lantern's glow. They are not fully formed people, but more like suggestions of human shape, silhouettes composed of a denser darkness or a faint, shimmering distortion in the air. They gather in a loose circle beneath the lantern, their forms shifting slightly as if in quiet conversation. Their number varies, sometimes 2 or 3, sometimes half a dozen. They do not make a sound. They simply stand within the circle of light, a silent congregation drawn to its warmth. The moment any observer takes a deliberate step forward to approach the shed or to get a clearer look, the figures dissolve. They do not run or walk away. They simply cease to be there, vanishing instantaneously. The lantern's light may continue to burn for the remainder of its 10 minutes, but the space beneath it is empty, leaving only the hollow feeling of a gathering abruptly adjourned. The shed's history is tied to the grim but vital work of coastal salvage. In the days before reliable weather forecasting and radio, ships frequently foundered on the treacherous offshore reefs. The men who waited here were a special breed. Often retired sailors themselves, who kept a patient, nightly vigil. The lantern was their beacon, a fixed point of light in the darkness, both for them and for any possible survivor swimming in the black waters. They would gather beneath it to share a flask of coffee, to watch the horizon, and to wait for the sea to give up its wreckage. It was a fellowship of the watchful, bound by a shared melancholy purpose. When modern navigation rendered their vigil obsolete, the shed was abandoned, but the lantern was left, a final, symbolic gesture. The self-lighting began years later, noted first by a lone hiker. The figures were reported soon after. Scientific scrutiny has proven inconclusive. The lantern has been examined and found to be completely empty, its reservoir dry, its wick rotted away. Its wick rotted away. The light itself emits no heat that thermal cameras can detect. The figures are even more elusive. They leave no footprints on the damp ground. And high-speed cameras capture only the moment of their disappearance, not their formation. Some researchers propose a complex combination of bioluminescent fungus on the sheds wood reacting with the cooling evening air, and low-lying sea mist being shaped by the unique topography into human-like forms. Yet, this fails to explain the deliberate gathering, the circle, the timing. This fails to explain the deliberate gathering, the circle, the timing. The deliberate gathering, the circle, the timing. The circle, the timing. The timing. Timing. To witness the lantern drift shed at twilight is to watch a ritual replay. The light comes on, a quiet, automated memorial. The figures gather, not as ghosts of individuals, but as echoes of a collective posture. Of men standing together against the vast, indifferent dark of the sea. Their silent communion speaks of shared patience, of eyes trained on the horizon, of the burden of waiting for tragedy to wash ashore. Their instant vanishing is not an act of fear, but of privacy. They are not a spectacle. They are a moment, a brief reunion of a watch that never ends, convened by a light that needs no oil. The shed and its lantern are not haunted by death, but by vigilance itself, by the ghost of a duty that was to watch, and wait, and be present when the sea grew restless. For 10 minutes each night, that duty is honored, and the silent watchers gather once more beneath their old, steadfast light, before fading back into the salt air from which they came. At the edge of the slow-moving bayou, where the cypress knees rise from the black water like gnarled fingers, there is a structure known as the crawfish-lined shed. It is a simple, low building of unpainted wood, raised on stilts above the damp earth. Its door hangs open on a single rusted hinge, an invitation to shadow and memory. Inside, the air is thick with the smell of old swamp mud, dried algae, and wet wood. The walls tell the story of the shed's purpose. From floor to ceiling, they are lined with old crawfish traps. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, are stacked and slung from hooks and nails. Their wire is rusted to a dull orange-brown, and many still have bits of frayed rope or weathered cork buoys attached. They are not arranged with care, but stored as if for a season that never ended. A silent congregation of dormant tools. By day, the shed is a still life, a museum of a forgotten industry. The only sound is the buzz of flies and the distant cry of a heron. But as full darkness settles over the bayou, and the chorus of frogs and insects swells outside, a subtle activity begins inside the shed. The traps begin to rattle. It is not a violent shaking, but a soft, persistent tremor, a metallic shivering that moves through the stacks. One trap will tremble, then fall still, as if nudged. Then another, on the opposite wall, will answer with a faint, tinny shudder. The sound is of wire brushing against wire, a dry, rustling chatter that seems to move around the room in no particular pattern. Then comes the second sound, the one that turns curiosity into a deep, primal unease. From within the traps themselves, from the dark, confined space behind the rusted wire, comes the sound of scratching. It is a frantic, skittering noise, the sound of something with a hard shell scrambling against metal. It is the unmistakable sound of trapped movement, of many small, desperate bodies trying to find a way out. The sound rises and falls, moving from one trap to another, sometimes seeming to come from several at once, a chorus of panicked scratching that has no physical source. The traps are empty. They have been empty for decades. Yet, the sound of life within them is vivid and urgent. The history of the shed is tied to a man known only as Trapper Gene. He was a man of few words but deep knowledge of the muddy bottoms. According to swamp lore, Gene had a peculiar philosophy. He believed the crawfish knew their fate, and that a trapped creature's spirit lingered in the wire until the trap was reset. He would often be heard muttering to his empty traps as he cleaned them, a low, steady stream of talk as if calming unseen occupants. One summer, during a sudden flood, Trapper Gene failed to return from checking his line. His boat was found overturned. The sheds, filled with his unbaited, waiting traps, were left untouched, a monument to a life spent in the silent, secretive world of the mud and reeds. This history frames the phenomenon. Paranormal theories often focus on tools and the energy of routine. Trapper Gene's entire existence was a cycle of setting, retrieving, and emptying these traps. The rattling at night could be an echo of that process, a memory of the traps being moved or stacked. But the scratching is something else. It is the sound of the catch itself, not the action of the fisherman, but the experience of the caught. Some interpret it as a residual haunting of the animals. A collective echo of countless small, final struggles imprinted on the wire. And the shed's atmosphere. Others believe it is a manifestation of Trapper Gene's own unique perspective. His belief in the lingering spirits of the crawfish made audible. The shed doesn't replay a human tragedy, but the endless, cyclical mini-tragedy of the hunt itself. To stand in the crawfish-lined shed after dark is to be immersed in a memory of industry and capture. The rattling traps suggest the beginning of the work. The frantic, empty scratching speaks of its constant, quiet conclusion. There is no ghost of a man here. Instead, there is the ghost of his daily harvest. The sound of life pulled from the murk. Still fighting in rusted cages long after both the trapper and the prey have turned to mud and memory. It is a haunting note of loss, but of endless, repetitive action. The shed remembers the purpose of its contents. And in the deep bayou night, it performs that purpose in sound alone. A symphony of soft rattles and desperate scratches. Telling the story of a man who listened to the swamp. And the swamp that now, forever, whispers back from inside his empty, waiting traps. Deep within the forgotten bayous, where the water moves slow and the air hangs thick with humidity, there is a shed that nature has claimed as its own. Known locally as the moss curtain shed, it sits on a sliver of high ground at the end of a submerged, overgrown path. The gray-green strands hang from the eaves to the ground in a thick, unbroken curtain, swaying gently in the stillest air as if breathing. The moss is never cut. The path is rarely walked. The few fishermen and trappers who know of its existence give it a wide berth. They speak of a simple, uncompromising rule. You do not part the curtain. For those whose curiosity overcomes caution, the first violation of that rule is tactile. Pushing the moss aside is like separating heavy, damp velvet. The door is marked. Not by weather or rot, but by 3 parallel gouges that run from just below the lintel down to the midpoint of the wood. They are deep, savage furrows, as if carved by something immense that hooked its claws into the timber and dragged them downward in a single, desperate motion. The wood within the grooves is dark, stained by time, but the edges are still sharp and splintered. These are not the marks of an animal trying to get in. They are the marks of something trying to get out. And then comes the cold. As the curtain is held open, a wave of frigid air spills from the gap between the door and its frame. It is a dry, ancient cold, the chill of deep cellar stone or a long-sealed tomb. This cold persists. Even on the most oppressive August evening, when the bayou feels like a warm bath, the space before the moss curtain shed remains a pocket of winter. A biologist named Leo was documenting unique epiphyte growth in the area, the plants that grow on other plants. The Spanish moss on the shed was legendary for its density and length. His scientific drive demanded a sample from the curtain itself. He pulled his pirogue to the hummock at dusk, his senses alert to the rule he intended to break. The curtain felt heavier than it looked, a weight of living fiber. He parted it, and the gouges on the door made him freeze. He had seen bear marks, panther scratches. These were different. These were different. They spoke of a scale and a force that seemed to warp the logic of the place. Then the cold hit him, a shocking, breath-stealing vapor that rolled over his skin. It carried a scent, not of decay, but of absence, of air that had not moved in a very long time. He quickly clipped a sample of moss and backed away, letting the curtain fall closed. The humid warmth of the bayou rushed back over him like a blanket. But the memory of that deep cold lingered in his bones. He spent the night in his camp, the sample bag beside him, feeling an unshakable sense of transgression. In the nearby settlement, an elder shared the story, not as a ghost tale, but as a geological record. The hummock, she said, was not always land. Long ago, it was a deep, still pool, a sinkhole of exceptional depth and cold, fed by springs from a place the sun never reached. Something large and ancient lived in that cold darkness. When the great drought came and the water table fell, the pool vanished, becoming land. The shed was built unknowingly directly over the sealed mouth of that void. The claw marks, she said, are not on the door. They are in the door. They are a shadow, a fossilized impression of the last, frantic reach of the creature as the water retreated. Forever trapped in the wood that later grew there and was cut to build the shed. The cold is the breath of the deep pool, still sighing from a crack in the world. The moss grows so thick to seal the entrance. A living bandage over a wound in the earth. Leo never published his findings on that particular moss sample. He now understands the rule is not about superstition. It is about containment. The moss curtain shed is not a haunted building. It is a geological lock. The curtain is a seal. The cold is a warning. The claw marks are a history. The people of the bayou do not fear the shed. They respect its function. They understand that some doors should remain curtained, not because of what is behind them, but because of what is beneath them. They know the land has memory. And sometimes that memory is a deep, dark pool of cold. And a single, fossilized moment of capture, forever trying to drag itself free. The coastal village of Haumar has a rhythm as old as the tides. Its days are marked by the screech of gulls and the scent of salt and pine. Its people live by the sea, a relationship of mutual respect and quiet understanding. But there is one place where that understanding breaks down. A single, weathered net shed, built on stilts over the inky water, that the locals simply avoid. By day, it is unremarkable. Gray, sun-bleached wood. A sagging roof. Old ropes hanging like forgotten vines. The shed is empty, and has been for years. No one stores their nets there. No one repairs their lobster pots inside its salt-crusted walls. Yet, by an unspoken agreement, the anomaly begins at night, and only on certain nights. There is no pattern the fisherman can discern, no phase of the moon or turn of the tide that reliably predicts it. It simply happens. The black water surrounding the Sheeta-S pilings begins to deepen, to thicken. Then, it blooms. A dark, vermilion stain spreads outward from the Sheeta-S foundations, unfurling into the bay like a vast, silent flower. It is not a reflection. It is not algae. Those who have seen it describe a color that seems to absorb the moonlight, a rich, deep red that moves against the current. A rich, deep red that moves against the current. The water itself appears transformed, heavier, almost viscous. It does not glow, but it possesses a strange opacity, as if something immense is diffusing just beneath the surface. And then, by first light, it is gone. The morning sun finds the water clear and ordinary, as if the event was a collective dream. Investigations have been attempted. Decades ago, the Regional Water Authority took samples during the day. They found nothing unusual, no chemical imbalance, no biological culprit. A team even moored a boat nearby one suspected night, but the phenomenon did not occur. It was as if the shed knew it was being watched. The true testament to the mystery is not in the water, but in the behavior of the villagers. The local fishermen, men and women who have read the sea since childhood, refuse to cast a line within sight of the shed. Their trawlers give it a wide berth. The rich fishing grounds that lap against its neighboring piers are left untouched. This is not a rule written in any ledger. It is a knowledge passed down quietly, from parent to child. Do not fish near the red water. The nets come up empty, or worse, they come up torn. Old Man Ewan, the village's unofficial historian, remembers when the shed was built. Was constructed by a newcomer, a quiet man named Alastair Crane, who kept to himself and fished alone. His catches were always strange, deep-water species rarely seen in the bayou. He was a figure of curiosity, not fear. Then, one season, he was simply gone. His boat found adrift, empty. The shed remained. And not long after, the red water was seen for the first time. Some whisper that Crane delved too deep, that he hooked something that should have been left sleeping on the seabed. Others speak of a natural fissure in the rock below the shed, a vent that exhales some ancient mineral brew only under perfect, unseen conditions. But no theory explains the consistent, absolute absence of life in those waters. The shed stands now as a silent question mark on the shoreline. On a calm, clear night, you might see a handful of villagers standing on the distant breakwater. looking not at the stars, but at the dark shape of the shed. They wait. They watch. They are not hoping to see the red water. They are ensuring the sea is behaving as it should. Because the mystery of the red water net shed is not a call for adventure. The people of Halmar have made their peace with it. They have given that small patch of ocean, and the lonely shed that guards it, back to whatever claims it. They have decided that some questions are not meant to be answered, and some waters are not meant to be fished. It remains a permanent feature of the landscape, a pocket of unexplained quiet in a world of noise. The nets are mended elsewhere. The boats dock farther down. And the dark water occasionally turns a profound and secret red. A slow, nocturnal pulse in the heart of the bay. Witnessed but never known. Respected by silence. And anchored by the simple, enduring weight of a story that needs no telling. On the banks of the slow-moving, tea-colored Willow River, there is a small, dilapidated boathouse known as the Hollow Paddle Shed. Its wooden planks are silver with age, and the shingled roof sags under the weight of moss. The river here is wide and quiet, flanked by towering cypress trees whose roots disappear into the dark water. The shed is empty, save for one object. Leaning against the far wall, as if placed there just moments ago, is a single, long wooden paddle. It is the only thing that was not removed when the shed was abandoned decades past. As night falls and the chorus of frogs begins, a different sound emerges from the vicinity of the shed. It is the distinct, rhythmic sound of paddling. Not the gentle dip of a casual rower, but the deep, firm pull of a paddle biting into still water. Followed by the trickle of droplets as it rises for the next stroke. The sounds do not come from inside the shed, but seem to circle it, moving from the river side to the land side and back again. Creating the auditory illusion of a boat making slow, patient laps around the structure. Sometimes, the sound is accompanied by the faint creak of wood, like the flex of a hull against a dock. The splashing is crisp and real, yet when a light is shown from the doorway, the surface of the river is undisturbed, a perfect black mirror reflecting the stars. The physical proof comes with the dawn. Investigators, and the rare curious visitor who stays until morning, have repeatedly found the paddle in a different state than it was left. It is often damp to the touch, its blade cool and beaded with moisture, as if it has recently been submerged. On particularly humid mornings, a small puddle of river water can be found on the dirt floor beneath it. Yet, the shed itself is dry. And the paddle never shows signs of having been moved from its spot against the wall. The history of this stretch of river is one of solitude and routine. For over 40 years, the shed was the domain of a ferryman named Arlen. His job was to operate a small, hand-pulled cable ferry that crossed the river at this very spot, a vital link for farmers and schoolchildren before the modern bridge was built a mile downstream. Arlen was a man of few words and profound consistency. Every evening, after his last crossing, he would meticulously rinse his paddle and lean it against the wall in the exact same position. His life was measured in strokes, in the pull of the cable, in the quiet solitude of the river. When the bridge opened, his purpose vanished overnight. He left the shed and, it is said, simply walked away from the river, leaving only his paddle behind as a mute farewell. The phenomenon began shortly after he was gone. The first to hear the splashing were fishermen camping nearby. They assumed it was an animal, but the rhythm was too precise. The local explanation is simple, and melancholic. They say Arlena's routine was so deeply ingrained in the place that it continues without him. The shed and the river remember the rhythm of his work. Scientific inquiry has focused on condensation and acoustics. The dampness could be explained by the Sheeta's cool interior meeting the warm, moist river air. But this does not account for the paddle being selectively wet while everything else remains dry, or for the puddles that form only beneath it. The sounds are more puzzling. High-fidelity recordings capture the distinct splash and pull. But sound mapping reveals an anomaly. The sounds do not originate from a single moving point, as a real boat would produce, but seem to emanate from a stationary ring around the shed, as if the memory of the action is tied to the location itself, not to a moving object. To spend a night at the hollow paddle shed is to be immersed in a ghostly routine. The rhythmic splashing is both lonely and comforting, the sound of a task performed with care, endlessly repeated. The rhythmic splashing is both lonely and comforting, the sound of a task performed with care, endlessly repeated. The paddle is the anchor of this ritual, the physical object through which the memory of labor manifests. Its damp blade in the morning is not a threat, but a report, evidence of a night's work completed. The shed stands as a monument to a vanished necessity, and the paddle within it is the instrument of that memory. In the silence of the abandoned riverbank, the splashing echoes the permanence of routine. A testament to the idea that some work is so much a part of a person and a place that it simply cannot stop, even when the worker is gone and the need for the journey has long since passed. In the deepest reaches of the freshwater marsh, where the water is tea-colored, there is a place known as the Singing Gator Shed. It is not truly a shed, but the collapsed remains of a trapper's cabin. Its cypress board sinking slowly into the soft, peaty earth. The structure is a skeleton, open to the sky, surrounded by still water and floating islands of hyacinth. And from this ruin, on nights when the moon is a thin sliver, a sound emerges. It begins as a low vibration, more felt in the chest than heard by the ears. Then it resolves into a deep, resonant humming. The sound is not mechanical. It is organic, rhythmic, carrying the texture of a human voice pushed to its lowest, most peaceful register. It resembles a song, a wordless, melancholic melody that seems to rise and fall with the gentle breathing of the marsh itself. It is not loud, but it carries with an unnatural clarity over the water, cutting through the usual chorus of crickets and frogs, which often fall silent in its presence. The most striking effect of this humming song is observed not on the structure, but in the water surrounding it. This part of the marsh is home to a healthy population of alligators. They are often seen basking on mud banks or gliding silently through the lanes of open water. Yet, when the humming begins, every alligator in the immediate area exhibits the same bizarre behavior. They become utterly, perfectly still. Those floating sink lower, until only their nostrils and the domes of their eyes break the surface. Like knobs of wet driftwood, those on the banks cease all movement. Not even blinking. Their legendary patience deepens into a state of suspended animation. They do not react to splashes, to lights, or to the close presence of boats. They are transfixed, listening. This collective stillness is more unnerving than any display of aggression. It is as if the ancient reptiles are paying a form of deep, instinctual respect to the sound, or are themselves held in a thrall that transcends their predatory nature. The history of this place is as murky as the water. Local lore speaks of a man who lived there long ago, known as Silas. He was not a typical trapper. He was a quiet man, a woodcarver by trade who came to the marsh for solitude and the specific cypress wood. He lived in the cabin for many years, and those few who visited him spoke of his odd habit. He would hum while he worked, long, complicated tunes he claimed he heard in the wind over the reeds. He said the gators grew accustomed to it, that they understood it was the sound of a man who meant them no harm. Silas disappeared one day, leaving his tools and half-finished carvings. Some said he simply walked into the deeper swamp. Others whispered the swamp had finally listened to his song, and taken him into itself. This story, whether true or not, provides a lens for the phenomenon. Theories of place memory are often invoked. If Silas hummed constantly, day after year, that specific, resonant frequency may have imprinted upon the unique environmenta. The hollow cypress stumps, the still water, the composition of the sunken cabin itself. Under the right atmospheric conditions, perhaps when the temperature and humidity align, the marsh itself replays this signature sound, like a natural phonograph. The reaction of the alligators is the greatest mystery. Herpetologists suggest it could be a conditioned response passed down, an ingrained memory. An ingrained memory that this particular sound pattern signifies no threat, allowing for a unique relaxation. Others propose a more speculative idea. The low-frequency vibration of the humming may resonate at a pitch that interacts with the sensory organs of the reptiles, inducing a temporary, trance-like state. Their stillness is not reverence, but a physiological reaction to a sound that, for reasons lost to time, signals absolute safety. To be in a boat near the singing gator shed. When the humming starts, is to feel the world change. The familiar, bustling life of the marsh pauses. The predatory tension that defines the food chain evaporates. You are surrounded by ancient creatures, rendered into living statues, by a melody from a collapsed home. The sound itself is lonely and beautiful. A ghostly lullaby for the wild. The shed does not sing of tragedy, but of symbiosis. It tells a story of a man who found a way to live within the marsh without being an intruder. And the marsh that remembers his peaceful signal. The humming is a truce, made audible. The still gators are the terms of that truce, observed in perfect, silent compliance. A moment of unnatural peace in the heart of the primordial swamp. Governed by a song no living throat can produce. From a singer long since gone. At the edge of the great northern plains, where the wind has a clear path for 1,000 miles, stands a solitary structure known as the Broken Rope Shed. It is a simple, sturdy building of weathered gray wood, once used for storing tack and tools for a ranch that has long since vanished. What remains, and what gives the shed its name, are the ropes. Dozens of them hang from the heavy beams, ranging from thin lariats to thick, braided hauling lines. They are all cut, or broken, or frayed at their ends. None are whole. None serve a purpose. By day, they hang motionless in the shafts of light that pierce the knotholes in the walls, collecting dust. But on windless days, and especially at night, they begin their silent, independent ballet. A rope near the far wall will slowly coil itself, lifting its frayed end off the dirt floor as if being drawn up by an invisible pulley. Another will twitch, then go slack. A third will swing in a gentle, pendulous arc, though the air is perfectly still. They tighten and loosen with a rhythm that suggests use, a phantom rehearsal of forgotten tasks. There is no pattern, no predictable sequence, only the quiet, persistent motion of things that are not at rest. Visitors who enter the shed often speak of a tactile sensation. It is not a grab or a pull, but a subtle, brushing contact against a pant leg or an ankle. When you look down, no rope is near enough to have made contact. The feeling is brief, harmless, but startlingly intimate, a reminder that you are sharing the space with movements you cannot see. A materials scientist named Clara was traveling the back roads, studying the degradation of natural fibers in different climates. She heard about the shed and its impossible ropes. She set up time-lapse cameras and high-sensitivity motion detectors inside, then waited in her vehicle, monitoring the feeds. Her cameras captured the movement. The ropes moved independently, without any correlating vibration in the structure or change in air pressure her sensors could detect. It was as if each rope had its own private, miniature breeze. She entered the shed to take fiber samples, the dry, dusty smell of old hemp and leather filling her nostrils. As she focused on a particularly thick, frayed haul line, she felt the distinct, soft whip of something against her calf. She jumped, looking down. The nearest rope was a full 3 feet away, hanging straight down, motionless. That night, reviewing her footage, she saw something her eyes had missed in the moment. In the frame, as she reacted, the rope that had been 3 feet away was now subtly curved, its end pointing toward her leg, before it straightened again. The contact had been real, but the source had moved, correcting itself before her eyes could confirm it. Her historical research pieced together a quieter story than she expected. The ranch was not a place of tragedy. It was a place where cowboys would stop to fix their gear. They would splice torn lariats, rebraid weakened lines, mend harnesses. The shed was a workshop of restoration. Every rope that entered broken was meant to leave whole. The ranch faded, but the intent remained, soaked into the very wood. Clara developed a theory she never included in her paper on fiber stress. The movement of the ropes is not haunting. It is practice. It is the shed's memory of its purpose, replaying the motions of splicing and threading, of testing a knot's strength, of coiling a line ready for use. The ropes are not ghosts. They are patients in a perpetual, invisible clinic, receiving treatment from hands that are no longer there. The brush against the ankle is not an attack. It is an assessment. A momentary check of tension, of texture, performed by habit. Clara left the shed as she found it, taking only her data and a deep sense of respect. She understands now why the few locals who know of it sometimes leave offerings of old rope on the porch. They are not feeding a spirit. They are bringing raw materials to a workshop that is still, eternally, open for business. The broken rope shed does not house broken things. It houses the enduring process of repair. The ropes move because they are remembering what it is like to be whole. And in that endless, silent rehearsal, they keep the craft alive. One phantom stitch. One invisible coil. At a time. High on the windswept moors of North Yorkshire, where the heather runs purple to the horizon, stands a solitary stone shelter. It was built a century ago for shepherds, a refuge against the sudden, brutal storms that sweep across the open land. But the shepherds do not use it anymore. They have another name for it now. They call it the fog net shelter. By all accounts, it is a simple structure. Low walls of rough local stone, a sod roof long since gone to wild grass, a single open doorway facing the valley below. On a clear day, it is a picturesque ruin, a dark speck against the vast, rolling green. But clear days on this particular stretch of moor are rare. The fog does not drift in from the sea or settle in the low valleys like ordinary mist. It generates. It begins as a thin, white wisp seeping from the shelter's doorway and the cracks between its stones. Within minutes, it coalesces into a dense, opaque bank that clings exclusively to the immediate area around the shelter. A perfect sphere of impenetrable gray, perhaps 50 yards in diameter, in the middle of otherwise clear air. The rest of the moor remains visible, sunlit or starlit, while the shelter drowns in its own private weather. Locals say you can see them when the fog is the Kesta shapes moving inside. Not the clear outlines of people, but suggestions of form, shadows shifting against the deeper gray. Sometimes one will pause in the doorway, a silhouette without detail, before receding back into the swirling white. There is no sound from these figures, no discernible speech or footsteps. Only the deep, damp silence of the fog itself. The most unsettling property of the phenomenon, however, is its reaction to sound. To shout, to call out, even to speak in a normal voice near the perimeter of the fog bank, is to trigger a response. The fog does not dissipate. It moves. It gathers itself, rolling forward in a swift, silent wave toward the source of the noise, as if seeking its origin. Those who have tested this, usually brave teenagers on a dare, describe a cold, breathless feeling as the wall of mist envelopes them, the world vanishing into a blinding white silence that seems to swallow sound itself. The figures within become more pronounced in these moments, clustering closer, though they never make contact. The shelter's history is murky. Land records show it was built by a landowner named Alastair Thorne. A reclusive man fascinated by meteorology and antiquarian studies. After its construction, he was rarely seen in the village below. He spoke of conducting experiments in acoustic damping and atmospheric condensation. Then, one autumn, he simply vanished. A search party found the shelter empty. A cold cup of tea on a table. And journals filled with frantic, unreadable symbols. The fog, they say, began the following spring. Scientific explanations have been proposed and found wanting. Some point to a natural cold spring beneath the shelter, meeting specific air temperature conditions to create a microclimate. But this does not explain the precision of the fog bank's borders, or its intelligent movement. Others suggest a peculiar acoustical property of the stone and landscape, perhaps trapping and amplifying moisture in a standing wave pattern. Yet no instrument placed inside has ever recorded anything unusual, except a profound dampening of all noise, as if the fog itself is a sound-absorbent material. The true evidence lies in the behavior of the Mura's inhabitants. The sheep, instinctual creatures, give the shelter a wide berth, their grazing patterns forming a neat circle around the zone where the fog appears. The birds do not fly through it. Experienced hikers, even those disbelieving of local lore, report a profound feeling of being watched when they pass near, a silence so deep it rings in the ears. The path now officially reroutes a half-mile away. Today, the fog net shelter stands as it has for decades, a quiet puzzle on the landscape. Researchers occasionally visit, setting up silent monitoring equipment, taking samples of the stone and the water. They leave with data that leads nowhere. The fog still forms, on no predictable schedule. The figures still move within it. It has become a place of quiet contemplation rather than fear. The people in the valley below do not speak of it as haunted, but as a place that operates by different, older rules. They understand that some places are not meant for interaction, but for observation. That some phenomena are questions posed, not problems to be solved. So the shelter remains, knitting its own weather from the cool moorland air. It is a landmark that teaches a singular lesson that in a world filled with noise, there are still places that demand silence. And that some mysteries are not shadows to be dispelled by light, but quiet, persistent facts of the world. Breathing slowly in the fog, waiting and watching from within their own perpetual cloud. On the shores of Lake Morne, a forgotten fishing shed tilts precariously over the water. Its pilings are rotten, and its floorboards are green with algae. A few feet from its listing dock, resting on the silted lakebed in about 4 feet of water, lies a heavy brass lantern. It has lain there for as long as anyone can remember, a piece of discarded history slowly being claimed by the lake. By day, it is just a dark shape beneath the surface, visible only when the sun is high and the water is still. But at night, the lantern undergoes a transformation. As full darkness settles, a soft, greenish-white glow begins to emanate from within its broken frame. It is not a reflection of the moon or stars, for it shines even on overcast nights. The light is faint, diffuse, and strangely inviting, illuminating a small circle of the sandy bottom and the drifting aquatic plants around it. It looks like a drowned star, or a jewel resting in the mud, casting an otherworldly radiance upward through the dark water. This is where the phenomenon shifts from visual to psychological. Those who stand on the old dock or the rocky shore, gazing at the submerged light, report a compelling, almost physical urge to reach for it. It is not a voice or a command, but a deep, visceral pull, a feeling that the lantern is important, that it needs to be retrieved, that it holds an answer just out of reach. The urge is to step into the cold water, to wade out, and to plunge a hand into the silt to claim the glowing object. For most, it is a fleeting fancy. But for some, the pull is so strong they have to consciously step back from the water's edge. A cold fear cutting through the compulsion. The lake, they sense, does not want to give the lantern up. The shed and the lantern belong to a man named Emmett, the last keeper of the lake's commercial ice harvest. Decades ago, before refrigeration, Lake Morne's thick winter ice was cut, stored in this shed, and shipped by rail. Emmett's job was to work through the night during the harvest, using the lantern to guide the ice cutters and to mark the dangerous open water near the dock. One bitterly cold February night, a sudden, freakish thaw caused a section of ice near the cutting area to give way. Emmett, standing at the edge with his lantern, fell through. The weight of his boots and heavy coat pulled him down quickly. The lantern was found on the bottom the next spring. But Emmett's body was never recovered. The self-illumination of the lantern began years after the ice trade died and the shed was abandoned. Fishermen out late were the first to see the eerie glow, mistaking it for a reflection until they realized its source. The stories of the compelling urge came later, always from those who knew the tale of Emmett's fate. Scientific examination has been limited by the lantern's location and the unsettling effect it has on would-be retrievers. Divers who have approached it describe a sudden, overwhelming sense of dread and disorientation, forcing them to surface. Water samples show no unusual bioluminescent organisms. The light itself emits no heat and does not register on infrared. Psychologists posit that the combination of the tragic story, the isolation, and the hypnotic quality of underwater light triggers a powerful somatic response, a manifestation of the human instinct to rescue or recover. Yet, the consistency of the experience is telling. The urge is not to look away, but to interact, to connect, to retrieve. To visit the drowned lantern shed is to engage in a silent, psychological tug-of-war. The sight is undeniably beautiful, a secret light in the black water. But that beauty is a lure. Standing there, you are not just an observer. You are being petitioned. It is a beacon that calls not for attention, but for action. It embodies the last moment of a man's life, the point where solid ground gave way to deep, cold water. The point where solid ground gave way to deep, cold water. And the light he carried was extinguished. Only to reignite as a permanent, submerged memory. The shed rots, the lake remains, and the lantern glows on. It does not threaten, but it tests. It asks a silent question of every visitor, appealing to the instinct to help, to save, to reach into the dark. And in that question lies its power, a gentle, radiant trap set in the silt, waiting for someone to feel enough pity, or curiosity, or compulsion, to step off the shore and wade into the deep, cold history of the lake. There is a small, isolated shed at the edge of the great cypress swamp. It is known as the Crooked Floor Shed. It sits on a slight rise of dry ground, a lonely sentinel surrounded by still, black water and towering, moss-draped trees. But to step inside is to enter a space that defies the laws of architecture and acoustics in profoundly unsettling ways. The floor is the first and most obvious aberration. The wide pine boards do not simply sag with age. They bend inward, toward the center of the single room, as if pulled by a tremendous, subterranean weight. The dip is pronounced, creating a shallow bowl that makes standing feel precarious, as if the very foundation is drawing you toward a focal point. There is no visible support beam beneath, no sign of a sinkhole. The wood is sound, not rotten, yet it bows in a perfect, unnatural concavity. From the lowest point of this bowed floor, water drips. It is a constant, metronomic sound, a single drop hitting a hidden surface below the boards. The rhythm never varies, regardless of the weather outside. In the height of a drought, it drips. In the freezing dead of winter, it drips. The water itself is cool and clear, with the clean, mineral taste of deep spring water. Not the brackish swamp that surrounds the shed. It seeps up between the boards at the center, beads. Beads, and falls back into the darkness below. In a cycle that seems utterly disconnected from the natural world above. But it is the third phenomenon that transforms the shed from a curious anomaly into a place of deep unease. If you stand quietly in the crooked room, particularly near the center where the drip falls, you begin to hear the voices. They are whispers, rising faintly through the gaps between the floorboards. They are not a single voice, but a layered murmur, as of several people speaking softly at once. The words are never clear, but the tone is unmistakably conversational, sometimes urgent, sometimes resigned. They seem to come from beneath the floor, from the space where the water drips into darkness. The history of this patch of swamp is one of sudden disappearance. Before the Great Cypress was a protected wilderness, it was sporadically logged. In the late 1800s, a small, independent crew of 4 men operated a portable mill in this area. They lived in a rough camp, and this shed was their cookhouse and meeting place. According to fragmented county records, the entire crew vanished over a single weekend. Their equipment was found intact, a pot of stew gone cold on the stove in the shed. A search found no signs of struggle, no bodies. The only clue was a note in the foreman's ledger mentioning a newly discovered, never-mapped spring beneath their camp, which he described as sweet and cold. The official assumption was an accident at the spring, a collapse or drowning, but the mystery of 4 grown men vanishing without a trace endured. This historical fragment provides a framework. Paranormal researchers suggest the shed sits atop a powerful confluence of events. The physical anomaly of the floor bending inward could be a literal manifestation of the sinkhole or spring cavity that may have claimed the men. The structure slowly mirroring the shape of the void below. The constant drip is the auditory signature of that hidden water source, eternally present. The whispers are the most complex element. They could be a form of auditory pareidolia, the brain interpreting the complex sound of dripping water echoing in a subterranean chamber as human speech. But the consistency of the experience suggests something more. The shed was the social heart of the camp, where the men would talk, plan, and argue. The intense, focused energy of their final, private conversations in that space, combined with the traumatic mystery of their end, may have left a sonic imprint. The whispers are not the sound of ghosts, but the echo of the shed's last normal function, the murmur of human company, now rising like mist from the water that may have been their end. To stand in the crooked floor shed is to stand on a lid. The bent boards strain over a mystery. The drip marks the passage of time in a timeless place. The whispers are the shed's memory of its purpose, bleeding up through the cracks. It is not a place of horror, but of profound and unresolved absence. The floor pulls you toward the center, the water reminds you of the depth below. And the voices offer the faint, haunting suggestion of the lives that were lived there. Conversations forever half-heard, seeping up from the dark, cold spring of the past. On a high, rocky promontory overlooking a restless sea, the night catch shed stands as a sentinel against the salt spray. It is a low, stone building with a single heavy door. Built by fishermen generations ago. Inside, draped over beams and piled in corners, are fishing nets. They are old, made of thick, tarred hemp, and they hold a permanent, inexplicable dampness. In the height of summer, when the cliffs are dusty and the grass turns brittle, the nets in the shed are wet. Not merely cool to the touch, but genuinely damp, as if hauled from the ocean an hour before. They never dry. They never mildew. They simply remain in a state of perpetual wetness, smelling of salt and deep water. No leak in the roof explains it, no hidden spring feeds it. The moisture is self-contained, a private weather system confined to the fibers of the netting. But the true mystery of the night catch shed reveals itself after dark. From within the sealed building comes a sound. It is a slow, grinding, dragging noise, the sound of a great weight being pulled across a rough stone floor. It is accompanied by the wet, fibrous creak of straining ropes and the occasional sharp snap of a cork float being compressed. The rhythm is laborious, punctuated by pauses, then another sustained, heavy drag. It is the unmistakable sound of a net full of a tremendous catch being hauled in, foot by grueling foot. A marine biologist named Elias was studying tidal patterns along the coast. The local lore of the perpetually wet nets intrigued him as a possible case of unique hygroscopic properties, perhaps a fungus or salt crystal within the fibers retaining ambient moisture. He obtained permission to examine them. Entering the shed was like stepping into the hold of a boat. The air was cool and briny. He touched a net, his fingers came away damp. He took samples, sealed them in dry containers. By the time he reached his lab an hour later, the samples inside the sterile jars were beaded with fresh moisture. His instruments could not identify the source. Determined to witness the nocturnal sounds, he returned at dusk, setting up a sensitive microphone outside the shed's door. As full night fell, the dragging began. It was not a single sound, but a complex auditory scene. The grind of weight on stone. The wet slap of netting. The intermittent, high-pitched strain of a rope under tension. He moved closer, placing his hand on the wooden door. He could feel a faint vibration with each dragging pull, a shudder transmitted through the stone foundation itself. Elias did not open the door. A deep, instinctual certainty told him that whatever was happening inside was a private process, not meant for observation. His research in the village revealed the shed's true history. This was not just a storage shed. It was a sorting house for the deep water catch, the place where the most valuable, weighty hauls from the dangerous northern grounds were brought. The work was done at night, by lantern light, to prepare the catch for the morning market. It was back-breaking labor, the nets heavy with a fortune in fish, and the floor stones were worn smooth by their dragging. The men took great pride in this specific, difficult task, a skill that separated them from the fair-weather coastal fishermen. Elias came to believe the night catch shed is not haunted by spirits, but by effort. The wet nets are not a symptom, but a trophy. They retain the memory of the sea. A prize carried home. The dragging sound is the echo of that skilled collective labor. A ritual of success replayed eternally. The shed is not remembering a tragedy. It is remembering a triumph. The satisfying, arduous weight of a full net. The proof of a gamble against the deep waters that paid off. He never published his findings on the net samples. They sat in his lab, perpetually damp, a quiet rebuke to known science. He now understands why the older villagers sometimes walk up to the promontory at sunset, but never approach the shed. They stand at a distance, listening as the dragging sounds begin. They hear the work of their fathers and grandfathers, still underway. They know the night catch shed is still in operation, hauling in a catch from a sea that exists only in memory, forever heavy, forever wet, forever proving that the most important work is never truly finished. In the quiet orchard town of Solace Glen, known for its orderly rows of apple trees and predictable seasons, there is a shed that defies a fundamental rule. It sits at the very edge of the old Henderson farm, now fallow, its red paint bleached to a dusty pink by decades of sun. To the casual eye, it is utterly unremarkable. But inside, a simple law of physics unravels. The phenomenon is consistent, and requires only two things. A single person must enter alone, and the sun must be low in the sky, casting its light through the single, dusty western window. And then, a second shadow appears beside it. It is not a blurry echo or a trick of refracted light. It is a distinct, solid, sepia-toned silhouette. The second shadow might turn its head, or take a slight step forward, or simply remain still, observing. They are two entities sharing the same wall, born from one source of light and one physical body. The first recorded account comes from Elara Henderson, the last owner of the farm. In her diaries, she wrote of going to fetch a bucket from the shed one late afternoon and seeing her companion's shadow for the first time. She thought it was her late husband, John, until she remembered she was entirely alone. At first frightened, she later grew accustomed to its silent, independent presence, noting its movements were never threatening, only curiously observant. Over the years, the shed passed from curiosity to local legend. Children dared each other to step inside at the golden hour. They reported that the second shadow felt like a presence, a silent audience. Some said it felt curious. Others said it felt like being seen, truly seen, for the first time. It never touched the primary shadow, never made a gesture that could be interpreted as aggressive. Its independence was its only message. Scientists and skeptics have visited, armed with light meters and projectors. They confirm there are no hidden light sources, no reflective surfaces cleverly placed to create a double image. The second shadow appears only for a living person. A dog that wandered in cast only one. A mannequin brought inside cast none. It is a response to consciousness itself. Furthermore, the Sheeta's interior geometry is normal. There is no logical stage for this play of light and dark. The most poignant theory comes from local historians. They note that the shed was built by Elijah Henderson, a twin who lost his brother, Samuel, to a childhood illness. Some speculate the shed is not haunted, but imprinted. A place where a profound, lifelong sense of another half, of a missing shadow, somehow manifested in the physical world, waiting for anyone to step inside and momentarily share that feeling. Waiting for anyone to step inside and momentarily share that feeling. Somewhere a profound, lifelong sense of another half, of a missing shadow, somehow manifested in the physical world. Of a missing shadow, somehow manifested in the physical world. Waiting for anyone to step inside. And momentarily share that feeling. A place where a profound, lifelong sense of another half. Of a missing shadow, somehow manifested in the physical world. Waiting for anyone to step inside and momentarily share that feeling. Today, the Henderson farm is a public trust, maintained by the town. The shed is kept locked, not out of fear, but out of respect. The key is held at the town library, and those with a genuine curiosity can sign it out. There is a small notebook left inside on a simple stool. The entries are brief, often profound. People write of seeing the second shadow pace while they stood still. Or seemed to examine its own hands. They write of a feeling not of being haunted, but of being accompanied. Of a silent, gentle reminder. That we all may cast more than what is immediately visible. That our light may trace outlines of things unseen. The twin shadow shed does not answer questions. It only presents a quiet, repeatable anomaly. It asks the visitor to consider what else walks beside them, unseen in the light of ordinary day. A memory, a potential, a lost piece, a silent witness. It is a space where light and identity perform a gentle, inexplicable duet. So the shed stands at the edge of the orchard, a simple red building in a field of grass. It waits for the sun to fall to just the right angle, for a single person to turn the key and step inside. To meet the shadow that is and is not their own. In that moment, in that golden silence, it offers a brief, wordless communion with the uncanny. A reminder that the world is still capable of soft, personal mysteries that no science can yet explain. But that the human heart can, quietly, understand. A reminder that the world is still capable of soft, personal mysteries that no science can yet explain, but that the human heart can, quietly, understand. At the edge of a vast, silent estuary stands the mud-marked net shed. For most of the day, the water retreats nearly a mile, revealing a smooth, gray plain of silt, pockmarked with crab holes and threaded with shallow channels. The shed, accessible only by a long, rickety boardwalk, seems to float above this barren landscape. Its purpose was to store and mend the great seine nets used by the local fishermen, a task often done at low tide. The phenomenon is discovered with the tide's ebb. As the water drains away, leaving the mud soft and gleaming, a set of handprints appears in the silt directly in front of the shed. They form a trail, a left and a right, leading in a straight, deliberate path away from the shed and out across the open mudflats. This trail continues for dozens of yards, a lonely procession of paired impressions, until it reaches one of the deeper, main channels where the last of the seawater still flows. There, the handprints simply stop. There are no returning prints, no scuffle, no sign of a body being dragged. The trail ends at the water's edge as if its maker slid into the channel and was carried away. With the next high tide, the sea sweeps in, smoothing the mud flat and erasing all evidence. But when the water recedes again, the handprints are always there, freshly pressed into the wet silt, leading the same path to the same watery end. No one has ever seen the prints being made. They manifest sometime between the tide's retreat and a visitor's arrival. They are always adult-sized, but their proportions are subtly wrong, the fingers perhaps a bit too long, the palms a bit too broad, suggesting a hand shaped by a lifetime of hard, wet labor. The shed's history holds the key to the sorrowful pantomime. It was primarily used by an older fisherman named Malachi, a solitary man known for his almost supernatural knowledge of the tides and the nets. He lived for his work. In his later years, he was afflicted by a creeping paralysis that began in his legs. Determined to remain independent, he adapted. He would crawl from his small boat, across the mud, and pull himself up the boardwalk to the shed to work on the nets, using his immensely strong arms to drag his useless legs behind him. His handprints in the mud were a common, if heartbreaking, sight. The tragedy was quiet. One evening, he was working later than usual. The tide turned, flooding the channels faster than anticipated. Trying to crawl back to his boat, he was overtaken by the rising water in one of the deeper runs. His body was found a week later, but the unique, crawling path he took was etched into the memory of the place. Modern investigation focuses on the mud itself. The estuary's silt has peculiar thixotropic properties. It liquefies under pressure but holds a shape once formed. Geologists suggest that the repeated pressure of Malachi's passage compacted the subterranean layers in a specific pattern. Now, as groundwater rises with the outgoing tide, it may be forced up through these paths of least resistance, creating the illusion of fresh prints. It is a natural, if bizarre, geological memory. Yet, this explanation cannot account for the chilling perfection of the sequence, the paired left and right, the unwavering line toward the channel. Nor does it explain the profound sense of melancholy that settles over those who follow the trail with their eyes, tracing its journey to the water's edge. To visit the mud-marked net shed is to witness a fossilized moment of struggle. The handprints do not feel like a ghost, but like a scar on the landscape. They tell a story of immense willpower meeting inexorable force. Following them is an act of quiet archaeology, uncovering not bones, but the shape of effort itself, preserved in mud and tide. They are a monument to adaptation, and to its ultimate limit. The trail does not loop, it does not return. It moves in one direction only, from the world of work and dry land toward the deep, swallowing channel. It is a daily, silent reenactment of a man's final, determined crawl, and the point where the sea, as it always does, finally won. The prints are not a warning, but a record, a testament written in water and silt, erased and rewritten with every turn of the tide. A testament written in water and silt, erased and rewritten with every turn of the tide. Ensuring that no one who sees them can ever forget the price of working alone against the implacable rhythm of the sea. On a remote, rocky stretch of coastline, where the sea gnaws at the cliffs and the wind has a salt sting, there is a decaying fisherman's shed known as Bone Float Shed. It perches on a shelf of stone above a treacherous cove, a place no sensible boat would now approach. The shed itself is a relic, its wood silvered by spray and sun. Its purpose, however, remains gruesomely evident. Stored within, on crude wooden racks, are old fishing nets. And woven into the thick, rotten twine of these nets are the floats. They are not made of cork or plastic. They are bone floats, an ancient practice from a harsher time. Each is a segment of animal bone, often a cow or sheep leg bone, hollowed out and drilled, then tied to the net to keep its edge aloft in the water. Dozens of these yellowed, porous cylinders are still knotted into the mesh. They are smooth from handling, stained by salt and time, and they carry a weight that is more than physical. By day, the shed is silent save for the wind whistling through its cracks and the distant crash of waves. But after midnight, when the world seems to hold its breath, a new sound begins. The bone floats, suspended in their nets, start to clack together. It is not a sound caused by the wind, for on perfectly still nights it still occurs. It begins with a single, sharp tap, like two knuckles meeting. Then another. Soon, a soft, rhythmic chatter fills the dark space, as the bone cylinders knock against each other in the still air. The sound is dry, hollow, and unsettlingly familiar. To the human ear, the collective clacking bears an uncanny resemblance to teeth chattering. Not the mild chatter of cold, but the rapid, involuntary clatter of deep fear or profound fever. It is a sound that bypasses the intellect and speaks directly to a primal unease. The rhythm is erratic, seeming almost conversational, as if a crowd of unseen mouths are communicating in a language of clicks and tremors. The sound of clattering teeth continues to echo through the night, a haunting reminder of the primal unease it evokes. The history of this cove and its shed is written in old maritime logs with grim economy. A century ago, this was the base for a small, close-knit crew who fished for deep-water cod. They were known as hard men, enduring brutal conditions. The salvage was minimal, but the nets, washed ashore in tangled, ghastly clumps, were recovered and stored in the shed. The salvage was minimal, but the nets, washed ashore in tangled, ghastly clumps, were recovered and stored in the shed. No one had the heart to untie the bone floats. Each one a reminder of the hands that had tied them. This tragedy is the anchor for the phenomenon. Those who study haunted objects point to tools that are extensions of the body. A fisherman's hands would have constantly touched, checked, and adjusted these bone floats. The energy of that daily, tactile relationship, suddenly and violently severed, may have remained within the objects. The clacking at night could be a residual echo of that activity, the nets being handled in memory. But the specific sound of chattering teeth adds a darker layer. Medical records from the distant port town note that several of the recovered bodies, what little was found, showed signs of extreme hypothermia before death. The final moments of the crew would have been consumed by a cold so profound it would lock their jaws in a relentless, mortal chatter. The sound that now emanates from the shed may not be the memory of work, but the echo of their end. The bone floats, once tools for catching life from the sea, have become receivers for the final, physical symptom of the sea's taking. To stand outside the bone float shed in the deep night is to listen to a sound that should not exist. The sea's roar is a constant, but this is a sharper, more intimate noise. It is the sound of the past reduced to its most basic, bony percussion. The floats are not haunted by ghosts, but by a physical sensation, the memory of cold so extreme it became a sound, trapped in the very objects the men crafted and carried. The shed is a stark memorial. It does not offer visions or whispers. It offers a chilling, auditory truth. The bone floats clack together, speaking a language of ancient cold and fear. Mimicking the final, helpless tremor of the men who once relied on them. A sound that rises from the nets long after the fish have turned to dust. And the waves have forgotten the names they swallowed. In the deep, silent heart of the southern bayou, there is a place of stillness known as the Calling Water. It is not a town or a settlement, but a specific, dark stretch of waterway. Where the cypress trees grow so close their roots form a tangled lattice beneath the surface. The air here is heavy, and sound carries with an unnatural clarity. It is here that the voices rise. They do not come from the trees or the banks. They emerge directly from the black water itself, as if the bayou itself is speaking. The voices are always human, and they are always in distress. They are weak, trembling with exhaustion and fear. They call for help. They say they are lost, that they are slipping, that they cannot hold on. They sound like a child, or an elderly person, or someone injured and alone. The tone is one of pure, desperate need, crafted to bypass logic and ignite the most basic human instinct, to aid another in peril. For generations, the people of the wider swamp have lived by a single, unwavering law. You do not answer the calling water. You do not steer your boat toward the sound. You put your head down, you pull faster, and you leave that stretch of water behind you. Those who break this rule, who shout out in reassurance or turn their pirogue toward the pleading, experience the same consequence. As they enter the area where the voice is strongest, the pleas suddenly stop. An utter, profound silence falls. And then, in the water beneath their boat, they feel the touches. It is not a grab or a pull. It is the soft, fleeting brush of fingers against a submerged ankle or calf. It is the gentle, investigative pressure of a hand sliding across a boot. The touches are numerous, coming from different directions. As if several people are treading water just below, reaching up to feel the presence of the one who answered. The water itself shows no ripple, no shape, only the dark, placid surface. But the sensation is unmistakable and intimate. A cold, silent greeting from below. An acoustic ecologist named Renata was mapping soundscapes in the wetland. She heard tales of the calling water and hypothesized a natural phenomenon, perhaps gas bubbles from decomposing vegetation rising through specific roots, vibrating to create eerie, voice-like sounds. She anchored her research boat at the edge of the area, equipped with hydrophones to listen beneath the surface. The first voice she heard through her headphones was a young woman's, sobbing, begging for someone to pull her out. The sound waveform on her screen was complex, layered, unlike any gas emission she had ever recorded. It was structurally identical to a human vocal pattern. Driven by a scientific imperative to locate the source, she did the very thing the warnings forbade. She called out. She said she was there to help. Silence crashed down. The headphones emitted only the soft hiss of water. Then, she felt it. A gentle, cold press against her leg, which was resting near the boat's gunwale, just below the waterline. It was not the bump of a fish or a branch. It was the distinct, articulated feeling of fingers, brushing from her calf to her ankle, then gone. A wave of primal dread, cold and solid, washed over her. She pulled her legs into the boat, started her motor, and left without looking back. Her analysis later showed the sounds were not emanating from the mud or roots. They were coming from the water column itself, a uniform diffusion of sound with no point of origin. It was as if the water was the speaker. Speaking with a historian from a remote community, she learned a different perspective. The bayou, he said, has a long memory of loss. Of people who slipped and vanished. Of children who wandered away. Of the sick and the heartbroken who sought its depths. The calling water is not a trap set by malicious spirits. It is an echo of that final, desperate moment. The last thought made audible, the wish for aid forever preserved in the medium that witnessed it, the water itself. To answer is to step into that moment. You are not communicating with a person. You are connecting with a recorded impulse of need, a snapshot of despair. The touches are not an attack. They are a response. It is the water, animated by that connection, reaching back in the only way it can, trying to feel the presence of the Savior that the lost one wished for. It is a tragic, endless feedback loop of longing. Renata filed no official report on those sounds. Some data points are too entangled with sorrow to be published. She now understands the law of the swamp is not one of fear, but of profound respect. To answer the call is not to save anyone. It is to immerse yourself in a grief that has no end. And to feel, for a chilling moment, the countless hands of the lost, still reaching through the dark water, hoping for a grip that will never come. The shed that breathes stands at the edge of the bayou, isolated and weathered by time. Its wooden planks are blackened from years of moisture, and the roof sags as if bowing under some unseen weight. From a distance, it appears ordinary, a final net shed for fishermen long gone. Yet as one draws closer, the subtle rhythm of creaking walls and shifting water seems almost alive, as though the building itself inhales and exhales with a slow, deliberate pulse. The water around the shed rises and falls, lapping against its supports in patterns that feel intentional. It is not the normal ebb and flow of the bayou, but a steady, measured motion, like a chest moving with a quiet breath. The air is thick and humid, carrying the scent of algae and decay. Every step across the wooden floorboards produces a groan, and the sound echoes in the small space, amplified as if the shed itself is listening. Those who enter often feel the walls shifting ever so slightly, imperceptible movements that suggest the building is not entirely still. At first, it is subtle, the sensation of space contracting around the body, a tightening in the chest. Then, as one moves deeper into the interior, the feeling intensifies. The shed seems to close in, its boards pressing closer, and the water surrounding the supports rises in tandem. Many have described the sensation of being drawn outward toward the bayou, as if the structure itself wants to claim those who linger too long. The ceiling beams moan with each gust of wind, though no storm is present. Shadows flicker against the walls, formed by moonlight spilling through cracks and gaps in the weathered planks. Some visitors report shapes that appear briefly, indistinct forms that vanish when one attempts to focus on them. The sensation of being watched is persistent, a presence just beyond perception, as though the shed contains memories or entities from its past. Inside, the floors are damp, slick with condensation and bayou water that has seeped through the supports. The rhythmic creaking of walls and timbers mirrors the rise and fall of the water outside. Yet beneath it lies something older, something faintly metallic, as if the air itself remembers the objects and lives that once filled the shed. Some claim it is impossible to step without matching the rhythm, to move freely without feeling the shed respond to every shift in balance. Visitors report sudden changes in temperature, brief cold drafts that sweep through the interior even on the warmest nights. The air feels heavy, thickened with an unidentifiable weight. Many have felt as though unseen hands brush past their skin or grasp at their clothing, but when they turn, nothing is there. The shed, it seems, is sentient in its own way, aware of intruders and subtly asserting control over the space. The wooden walls themselves tell a story. Cracks and knots create patterns that suggest faces, limbs, and figures frozen in the grain. At times, the shapes seem to move or stretch when caught in the corner of the eye. The interplay between water, shadow, and movement creates a sense that the shed is alive, responding to every observer. The water around the shed adds to the illusion, reflecting moonlight in undulating patterns that make the walls appear to breathe more vividly. Those who linger report a growing tension in their bodies, a feeling of weight pressing down on shoulders and chest. The shed seems to encourage stillness at first, a false sense of calm, before the rhythm of the walls and water begins to dominate the senses. Some have tried to flee, only to find that the space feels elongated or constricted, the doorway seeming farther away or narrower than it should be. Panic rises as the shed asserts itself, an awareness that grows stronger the longer one remains. Stories from past visitors describe a distinct sensation of being pulled outward, toward the water surrounding the shed. Some claim the boards bend subtly, tilting toward the bayou, as if the structure is not just aware but capable of movement. The creaking intensifies in response to movement, echoing across the interior, creating the sense that the shed is alive with purpose. The water outside mirrors this pulse, rising with each breath the shed seems to take. Even during daylight, the shed has a strange presence. Its shadow falls in impossible ways. And the reflection on the water sometimes shows forms that are not present in reality. Those who peer too closely report a dizzying sensation. As if the shed itself is drawing attention and energy from the observer. The experience is cumulative, subtle at first, growing to an almost unbearable intensity for those who remain too long. The shed that breathes is not merely a structure. It is a living monument to the bayou itself, a place where time, water, and wood converge into something unearthly. Every visitor leaves with a sense that they were inside something far older and more aware than any ordinary building. For those brave enough to enter, the shed offers an encounter with a space that is alive. A breathing entity at the edge of the bayou. Its presence lingers even after departure, a memory of movement, shadow, and water. The shed that breathes is a place that resists being forgotten, drawing the living into its rhythm and leaving an indelible mark on all who step across its creaking floors. Thank you, my dear friend, for drifting through the haunted bayou net sheds of Louisiana with me tonight. These small structures were built for survival. But the bayou is older than any shed, any net, any human intention. The swamp remembers everything that enters it. Every secret. Every body. Every whispered prayer. If you ever find yourself near a bayou after dark, remember these stories. Do not trust lights on the water. Do not enter sheds that should be empty. And never follow voices coming from below the surface. The bayou is patient. And it never forgets. Rest well tonight. Keep the lights close. And until our next journey into the shadows, listen carefully. Because in the bayou, something is always listening back.